Welcome to another episode of From Garage to Growth. And this is the podcast where we delve into the transformative potential of entrepreneurship in empowering underrepresented communities, particularly focusing on Afropean entrepreneurs and the challenges they face in accessing venture capital. Our guest today is Tino Chibebe, author of the Black Opportunity Conversation on Venture Capital and Afropean Entrepreneurship. And he will shed light on the systematic biases, hurdles, and immense opportunities that lay within the venture capital ecosystem. So to get things started, I just want to give you the floor, Tina, and give us an idea of who's Tino Chibebe.
Yes, so I'll start off by pronouncing my name appropriately. So it's Tino Chibebe. It's a Zimbabwean name. So a lot of people, when they hear Tino, they're like, "Oh, are you from Zimbabwe?" And yes, I am. So born and raised in Zimbabwe, and then I moved to Belgium in my late teens. And I moved with my family basically. And when I moved to Belgium, I did my last 2 years of high school here in Belgium, and I started university. And whilst I was in university, I think I might be answering some of your questions already, but I studied business and finance, and whilst I was studying business and finance, I was just I would say I wasn't the most focused student in terms of my studies were tip top of everything. I wanted to branch out a lot of the time, and that branching out meant I joined a student organization called Capital, which was a finance student organization, and we wanted to bridge the gap between finance and the classroom. And we did this with networking events, workshops, guest lectures, etc., etc. But when we hosted all these events, I noticed that there weren't a lot of people that looked like myself from the companies, right? So we would invite guest speakers, the CEOs of banks in Belgium, etc., CFOs of various institutions, but none of them looked like me. And so I was wondering why that was. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of reading on pre-colonial, colonial Africa, and what the consequences were. And I think the parallel events of being in the student organization and doing a lot of that reading meant that I decided to write a book myself to organize these thoughts for myself. And because, I like to write, and the reason why I like to write is to organize my thoughts. So I wanted to organize my thoughts on something that I thought was pretty important. And I thought a book was a good medium to do this. And I think that transitions us into what we're going to talk about mostly.
Yeah. Okay, so to get things started, your introduction, as you mentioned, you are from Zimbabwe and you moved to Belgium. And the experience that shaped that transition kind of kickstarted your entrepreneurship. In the book, you talk about the biscuit side hustle that you ran. How did that influence your startup journey?
That's a really good question. And it's super detailed, which means that I can tell that you read the book.
Yeah.
I do a lot of interviews with people who don't read the book, so so thank you for that. Secondly, with regards to the biscuit journey, so just to give maybe some listeners and viewers some backgrounds, there I was with my friends, 2 friends actually. Shout out to Tafadzok Fajne and Farai Bwakura. And we were like, yeah, we want to make some money. And we're like, how are we going to do that? And they were these biscuits that no one else could find apparently. And they were really good. And so I had the plug, quote unquote. And this was a spa that very few people had access to. And it was within my neighborhood. So we would source them from there and then bring them to school and then sell them. Right. And me, it was just finding a gap in the market, finding what people wanted and providing that to them. And how that has influenced my entrepreneurship today, I would say it's basically the same thing. It's the most valuable things are what people want. And if you're able to meet demand then it's going to work out. Myself right now, am I an entrepreneur? No. Is Fari an entrepreneur? No. He's an engineer. Is Tafadzo an entrepreneur? No. He's a doctor somewhere. But what it did teach me is, to think on my feet, to think about what people need and how to, meet demand. And I think that entrepreneurial spirit has followed me like throughout the years. So with that business, we started it when I was, I think, about 14. I started, or rather I joined up with another business where we were, uh, you know, uh, selling clothes. And then with all the profit we made from that, we would donate it to charity. So that was nice. We did it for a couple of years. And, with a lot of my career now, I've been on the investment side. So would I say that experience has really contributed to like what I do now, mostly on the investment side? I'd say no. Was it a fun experience? Is it a nice story to tell? Is it something nice to write in a book? Sure. That's your question.
So, so that moment, oh, well, during you spoke about how you guys got like, robbed to a degree, I think, and that setback, did that kind of make you go, oh, maybe this is not my thing? Did that not launch you, or did you realize, oh, it was just another setback?
Nah. So when we got robbed, it was just like, the business is over, right?
Yeah.
Because we didn't have enough capital to like reinvest into the business because like all our assets were essentially gone, like the product. So like, what we learned is that you should probably not keep your inventory, your money in the same place.
Yeah.
So you should probably disperse the risk a little bit. So yeah, as a kid, it was heartbreaking, but it was also a good lesson. And just like stuff happened and you just got to move on. It's either like, you take the horse behind the barn and shoot it, or you try to go again. In our instance, we did the first thing. And I think, just to connect to the overall topic of entrepreneurship, I think it's something that a lot more people should do. In terms of just like knowing when to quit. I think there's no shame in that.
Yeah, there shouldn't be too. So in the book yourself, you talk about your journey of moving to Zimbabwe and Belgium and this journey of rediscovering your blackness. So,
Right.
so apart from the barriers added to the Black community, we sometimes feel that we must work twice as hard as anyone else. So in your journey of self-awareness and regarding your racial identity, how is your initial motivation to prove yourself evolved throughout the years, and what factors contributed to that transformation?
So that's a really good question. And when I first got to Belgium, like this was very much a part of my mindset because like, as I write in the book, like in Belgium is when I really understood like, oh, I'm actually Black, right? Yeah. Like, I always tell people like in Zimbabwe, my doctor was Black, my president was Black, my teacher was Black. So there's no visible barriers in terms of what I could be and what I could do. But in Belgium, this was very much the case where like, the higher up you go into like positions that are like, quote unquote, sought after, the lesser and lesser you see people that are Black. Some might say it's normal. You're in Belgium, but some might say, look, they are very material reasons as to why this is happening. Things like, discrimination from workplaces, things like siphoning kids into more vocational studies as opposed to academic studies. These things have been studies documented and they are real things. So, when you look into the numbers, you will see that like, there are very material barriers that are stopping people from accessing some of these spaces and places. And so when I then was thinking more about this stuff, I think a lot of people will initially think, okay, fine, it's time for me to work twice as hard to get half as much. This is my situation. This is what I have to do. But I think what happens is that mindset is not necessarily sustainable. And that lack of sustainability can lead to things like burnout, right? Yeah. Which is something I think is very prevalent within the community. Frustration, depression, you name it. And I think what has evolved into my current mindset around it is, I'm just going to do my best and I'm going to work for my community as much as I can. in any small or big way I can, I'm just going to try to leave the earth a better place for my community.
Yeah.
I think it's a more sustainable endeavor. I think it's more beneficial, not only for the individual, that's myself, but also for my community, right? And that's where I stand on it now. So whilst I do understand the work twice as hard mindset, I do question its validity in terms of being sustainable and it being damaging to one's mental health.
Yeah, it is. Because you're putting way more into this goal than anyone else around you. And at the time where they're fresh and ready, you like, oh, I've been working so hard. Like, why am I not moving? So yeah, it does lead to burnout and feeling somewhat.
And it takes, like, not only are you doing the work, but you're also doing this mental work of just like pushing against, like, you know, these imaginary, very non-clear barriers, right? That's a lot of work. That's a lot of mental strain too. So it's fatiguing, to be honest. And I think beyond that, people can find much more better ways of being if they get over the whole twice as hard mindset.
Yeah, they can. So the book is called The Black Opportunity, and Judith Dada in the book describes it as the black, as a reality rather than a morally an opportunity. So to you, what is the black opportunity?
So I think you might be the first person I'm telling this, and it's taken me a while to actually admit it, but I don't like the title of my book. And I and it makes sense why I don't like it, because when I actually ideated it, it's like I wrote the book first.
Yeah.
And then the title came afterwards, you know, where it's like, okay, what are we going to name this thing? And it's like, it was a quite pressure sensitive decision. Like, my publisher was like, you know, barking up my tree, like, hey, like, we need this like title ASAP. And I'm like, what am I going to name it? My book is about opportunities, Black people, the Black opportunity. Let's do that. And so I've had to like roll with it. But like in the back of my mind, I've known like, I don't like this title. But
what would have been the go-to title then?
So I say that to say that gives a little bit of a background into like how these titles sometimes come about. Like either like, you know, the author has no idea, or like the publisher suggests something, or it's like a mix of both. But to speak to the Black opportunity, when I first ideated it, like I said, I had written the book first. And I think what the title encapsulates is about what can be realized if, you know, discrimination weren't a thing. So the point of the Black opportunity is about saying, specifically within venture capital, if we hire Black managers, if we invest in Black founders, we can realize our startup boom in Europe, where we create products that are made by the Black community for the Black community, but not necessarily just for the Black community, but also serving the broader European populace in ways that we haven't seen before. And it will give rise to a bunch of ideas and a bunch of products that are made differently, because this is a systematically ignored group of people bringing new ideas to the startup ecosystem. And if that is juiced up to the max, what can that be? Like, what future can we like see like going forward, you know? So that's what the Black opportunity was about. And when I explain it that like that, then it's like, oh, okay, it's a cool title. But initially, I'm always got this back in the back of my mind, like, oh, I'm not sure about the title. And just to link it back to Judith Dada, I remember I was interviewing her for my book, you know, and at some point she stops and she's like, you know what? I don't like the Black opportunity, like, as a phrase, you know, like, now the Black reality. And what she was getting to was that, you know, the opportunities are here. Like, the people that are innovating are here. Like, it's just a matter of people tapping into those skill sets, people tapping into those founder pools and like reaping the rewards of those. And she was basically saying, like, the people that don't acknowledge this now are dinosaurs, and it's only a matter of time for them to like, go the way of the dinosaurs, like practically like die out and like not be relevant towards like the future of innovation. So The Black Reality is a cool alternate title for the book, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was reading that part, I was like, okay, it's more in the sense of, for me, it was it's the reality in terms of it's happening. And if you are not on the train, you are being left behind. So I was like, okay, interesting take on it, on the phrase, the Black opportunity.
Which title do you prefer?
Well, the thing is, the Black opportunity kind of touched me when I read the plot of Judith Dada. I was like, oh, okay, this connects to that now. So I was like, okay, there's connection between the two titles. But the other titles you suggested to also has a good connotation of it in terms of the book and the source that's in the book too. So yeah, I think the title that's in the book now is what I would go for. Once you read it, I'm like, okay, cool. I understand what you're talking about. I can feel what's happening here. So I would go with the book. I would go with the title as is.
That's
yeah. So we're going to move into the main topic that the book focuses on, which is venture capital. So for our listeners, can you just give us a description of what venture capital is, so people can know what it is?
Yeah, so venture capital is a term that encapsulates the early stages of financing startups. And what are startups? These are human institutions that are working on problems in high-risk environments. So a startup in the venture capital context isn't necessarily like, I don't know if listeners are going to resonate with this term. It's not like a tuck shop, like you've got your goodies.
Well, let's say maybe a spitty.
Exactly. Like
in the German term.
Exactly. It's not that. It's not like a corner shop, but it's more like, are you utilizing technology to scale something? And with venture capital, the key thing is scalability, right? So the idea is to invest a sum of money in order to, improve the scale opportunities for a startup and hopefully exit either via acquisition, IPO. And yeah, that's venture capital in a nutshell.
Yeah. So the notion of venture capital being this gateway for businesses to grow, how would you describe its role in supporting early stage businesses and driving innovation?
I mean, money creates money, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where venture capital comes in. It gives people the foot up in order to grow their businesses. But what is also unique about venture capital is that like the money is also coming with investors attached to it, so people behind it. And what is a key differentiator sometimes within venture capital is like who these investors are. So believe it or not, there are a lot of people with like 250K to invest in a startup, right?
Yeah.
This might shock some listeners, but unfortunately, like this is the world we live in. And what differentiates like a good investor between a good investor and a bad investor is like beyond the money, like what can you provide me? So can you provide me with a network? Can you provide me with expertise, like within the vertical that I'm innovating within? And I think that's where venture capital becomes like a competitive industry where investors compete on deals, on startups, either via their expertise or via their network on top of the money that they can offer startups.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So in that notion, in the book, you talk about, you highlight these disparities between funding between Black and white entrepreneurs. Could you discuss some structural barriers contributing to this gap and potential strategies for addressing this gap?
I think one of the very obvious things is what I like to call the Black network gap. So what that means is, and it's something that I touched on in my previous response, and it's about who you know and how you know them, right? Within the Black community, what we do see, like, across the US, UK, Europe, is that there aren't a lot of angel investors. So what angel investing is the step just before venture capital. And this is where ticket sizes are a little bit smaller. So a ticket size is the amount of money that you invest in a startup. And this is like the 10K, the 20K that you can get from your family and friends. So within venture capital, there's family and friends round. And this is the first round of money that you raise as a founder in order to kickstart your business. Within the Black community, there's not a lot of people that can, freely give this 5K, 20K for a risky startup opportunity. But within other communities, particularly white communities, this is more prevalent. This is not to say like it's abundant, but I'm just saying like proportionally and just like incidence wise, it's just more prevalent to see it within white startup communities. So this is one of the biggest gaps that I see between like Black founders and non-Black founders in the EU. And in terms of addressing that, I think it would be really good for investors, particularly angel networks, angel syndicates, which are groups of angel investors, to really diversify their sourcing. And what is sourcing? It's basically their flow of startups that come into their view and they evaluate. Because if they diversify like the pool of startups that they see, that they are more able to potentially invest in Black founders and other founders too, just not the typical white cis male STEM educated founder.
Like, so on that notion, from your interviews, what are some of the challenges that Black entrepreneurs face when trying to access this network? But you spoke about the network gap. What are those challenges that the Black individuals are struggling in terms of accessing those networks so they can get the VC funding that they need?
Yeah, it goes back to like, do you know these people? And if you do know them, how do you know them? Something I talk about in my book is homophily. And this is the propensity to like someone based on how similar you are. So it's no mystery that like, I noticed that you have dreads, O'Brien. I think I like you a little bit more because you have dreads, right? Why? Because I have dreads, right? There's just like that, like, phenomenon that occurs. And this happens just with people in general. But what we noticed was that like within business and within venture capital, within the startup business, to be more specific, if we're making business decisions based on whether we like someone or not, like this is extremely inefficient. So we see initial offerings for shares, so IPOs, are actually less successful when the investors, for example, come from all the same schools. Right. So this is a phenomenon that is noticed on the American Stock Exchange, and more so, like the lack of success increases when it's between people of the same race, so the same cultural background. So that's to say that, making decisions based on like whether we like people based on the fact that we went to the same school as them, they have the same last name as us, or we were referred to them by our friend, whilst like, they really cut out a lot of time in terms of like getting to know each other as people. It's also an inefficient process business wise. So this is what Black founders are dealing with. They're dealing with like, the natural phenomenon of people liking people that look like them. It just so happens that a lot of investors at the current moment are white, are of a typical background. They went to certain schools, etc., etc. And when you build up all those categories and subsections, you find that there are not a lot of Black people at these intersections.
So the notion of race and not seeing the other person because they look like you, how is your experience in Belgium shed light on the intersections between race and businesses? And how do we break these societal based biases and stereotypes that impact opportunities for the Black community? And in the book, you refer to, I call it the Eddie Murphy scene. How do we stop scenes like that from happening?
Yeah. So for context of the listeners, I talk about um, a young Belgian founder right now. So he's got a media startup. His name is Clement Iradikunda. So shout out to him. And he was searching for a job at some point. And when he went to the job interview, he was all afroed up because it was COVID. So people weren't really going to the barbershop a lot because, quarantine and stuff like that. And one of the last things the interviewer said to him was that, "Hey, you look like Eddie Murphy." So to a lot of listeners, this might be like, "Oh, so what?" But if you think about it, like this person came in to talk business, and what the interviewer immediately compared him to was like a comedian, right? So you can ask the question like, did they take him seriously during that interview? And your question is, how do we stop things like that from happening? I think making ourselves aware of the ways in which we might cause others microaggressions is definitely something that we can pursue. And how do we make ourselves aware of that? I think things like reading my book will make people aware of how they can, stop themselves from doing that, and also the language in order to address some of these things. And I think ultimately ask more respectful and smarter questions, because I think all of us are learning, right? I think white people are learning, black people are learning, but there's a way to learn without, discriminating against each other, without victimizing each other, without, causing each other microaggressions like what we just highlighted with the Eddie Murphy story. And I think a way to ask smarter questions is by reading the literature that's around that, things on anti-racism, reading things on venture capital as well, and seeing how can I unbias myself? How can I unbias my mind? How can I open up my mind to other people and not look at people through the lens of race, but as people with experiences, personalities, and skills?
Yeah. So, and on that notion too, in the book, you mentioned this case study of a black female founder who has success hinged on the fact she needed to get a white male co-founder. So this raises the notion of tokenism. How can VC firms ensure genuine inclusion and value black founders for their unique perspective?
I think so. It's the age-old diversity versus inclusion, right?
Yeah.
And this is why we now have diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the diversity part is okay, let's black people, let's get a bunch of women into our companies, right? That's the diversity part, which is cool, but can lead to tokenization, because now when you don't have the inclusion part, you don't allow for people to be their best selves and to bring in those perspectives that, make them who they are. And that can be additive in a business context. So focusing on the inclusion and the equity, and the inclusion can be small things. So I think it's Ramadan right now for all our Muslim brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And, having a moment at the office, for example, to break fast, for example, if that's a thing that people are doing at the office, or having a room specifically dedicated to prayer, can go a long way to making people feel included within the workspace. I mentioned the last one, a room for prayer, because I remember it was the football team Liverpool that had a prayer room for all their Muslim fans and supporters. And I remember how that made some of my friends feel like they felt included, they felt seen. And I think small things like that, how you can see other people including diverse people within the organization, can go a long way in order to make sure these people also contribute and can be their best self and do not feel a need to be tokens within the organization.
Yeah, that's true. So an entrepreneur's basis is based on solving a solution, but usually that solution is based on lived experiences. So on that notion, how does the lack of cultural understanding and shared experiences between entrepreneurs and investors impact the evaluation and support of entrepreneur endeavors, particularly in marginalized communities? How can we solve that problem where, let's say before you referred to, we both have dreads. let's say I come up with an invention that makes it easier for, let's say, someone who's here in Europe now to kind of crochet the dread. And this invention is great, but I'm presenting this idea in a panel that's mostly white. So to them, that idea would be like, why would this even make sense? How do we involve that?
I think the best way to solve that is through data. So if you're able to collect data on, let's say, how many people in Europe have dreads, right? You're able to now make like market opportunity assertion, right? So it's fair and fine to come in front of investors and say, hey, cool, look, I've got this cool like crochet idea, but it's a totally different thing if you're telling them this is a 6 billion euro opportunity because this many people are in Europe. They spend this much money on their dreads. If we disrupt this market with technology by using this implement, we're able to like tap into that market share. I think, data is one of the most important things I think the Black community needs more of. And data collection specifically on race, specifically on Black people's buying habits, things like that will go a long way in order to make cases for products like you've mentioned. And I hope you eventually make that product.
Yeah, it's a struggle. Yeah, it's one of the few things since I've been here in Germany where I'm like, do I have to wait until I get home to get my dreads sorted out? Because finding someone here is...
Yeah, a lot of people in Europe literally just wait until like they go home to get their dreads retouched. And on that, I actually have a friend who's starting up like a lounge, or people specifically with dreads. And what he noticed was that, you know, every time he has to go get his dreads done, he's always like not in the most comfortable spaces, not in the most family friendly spaces. And his idea is to create like a lounge sort of space where you can also bring your kids comfortably, like, you know, feel safe, feel like there's a certain level of like customer service maintained, etc., etc. But just in a sentence, I would say like the, you know, dread care, but bougie. And I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
I thought that's produced in Europe because I think the market is there. I think there are people with a certain level of income that would like a certain level of experience, and addressing that gap in the market, I think would be cool.
Yeah, it would. So in the book, in chapter, I think it's in chapter 3, if I'm not mistaken, you speak about pattern matching. So pattern matching plays a significant role in VC funding decisions. Could you discuss how this practice influences which startups receive investment and how it might contribute to disparities in funding for underrepresented funders?
So the example I use in the book is from Vivek Wadhwa, and he basically describes the problem like this. I want to invest in the next Mark Zuckerberg. I want to invest in the next Facebook. What do the founders of the next Facebook look like? They look like Mark Zuckerberg. What does Mark Zuckerberg look like? Of course, like he went to Harvard. He's a dropout, super focused, super good at executing, but he's also white. He's also of a specific background. And that pattern matching leads into investors not looking for the next Facebook in terms of like the merit of the business, but also looking for people like Mark Zuckerberg, which means like, you know, white, male, cis, etc., etc. The 2024 version of this could be, you know, everyone's looking for the hottest thing in AI now. And what that will look like is that, you know, they're going to look for anyone who has maybe done an internship at the Google AI team, the Facebook AI team. They work about 3 years there, and then they say, hey, we're starting a startup. And then everyone's rushing to like invest in these people, like just mirroring the pattern, copying each other, basically. And yeah, pattern matching, copying each other in terms of investment decisions. doesn't yield the best results. It leads to people investing. So in the case of AI, it leads to investors investing in things that they just don't understand, because I feel like when new technology, I think something very similar was the crypto boom of 2020, 2021. Crypto was just the next thing. Web3 was the next thing. How many Web3 and crypto businesses do we know now that are still top of mind, et cetera, et cetera? And we see that with the AI as well. We're going through like a bit of a boom where everything is AI. Everyone and their mother has an AI company, quote unquote. But this is also a reaction because investors are investing in AI right now. So these are some of the problems that pattern matching can create.
Yeah, because it's easier to go, to go where everyone else is rather than trying to start something when there's no traction at all. So people feel like I'm wasting my time. Like this is where the money is moving. So people shift to where the money is moving, which creates a problem as well. So in the book, at the beginning, you speak about Oliver's story, the so-called the Uber of tractors in Africa, and how he struggled to get VC funding. So how can alternative sources of funding kind of help underrepresented communities? And how can they say the African communities, not just in Africa, but within the African diaspora, create alternative sources of funding that can fund African-centric businesses?
Yeah, I think what's really happening right now and the trends that I'm super happy to see is on the up and up is investment syndicates. And these are of the angel investment nature where young African professionals are coming together and saying, hey, look, let's start investing in these startups. And I'm also seeing a lot within women in Europe where they're starting women syndicates that only invest in women startups within Europe to address like the gap that exists between male founded startups, which have a disproportionate amount of funding as compared to women startups. I think this is a great way to address the problem because you're facing the problem head on, right? Like you're being the solution that you want to see in the market and not just wanting to be part of someone else's fund or, hoping that someone comes and gives you a big bag of cash and then you can invest in founders. No, you're coming together within your community to start your own investment fund. And I think the more of these we have, the more angel syndicates we have, young group of Africans with a few $1,000s to spare per year to invest in startups, the better the chances are, not only in Africa, but also in Europe, where we see like these angel collectives come up, the better chances that African-led startups get off the ground and get even more funding because at the earliest stage, someone has backed them. Hopefully they get traction using that financing, and that traction can create more traction for more investment. So a very practical solution in conclusion for me is angel collectives and angel syndicates.
Yeah, I love the idea of being the solution that you want to see, because that's kind of the only way to do it. So from your research for the book, what was the most surprising and eye-opening discovery that you made regarding the challenges Black entrepreneurs face in accessing venture capital?
What was the most challenging? To be very honest, I would say that it's 3 years now since I've written the book, but I'd say that nothing really surprised me. I would say the confirmation of what I already thought was surprising. So, for example, if you know that it's hard out there for Black founders to access venture capital in Europe, but then if you also see that hardship is number, and that number looks like 1% or like 0.5%, like the crystallization that numbers provide you can shock. So I think that's where a lot of like my surprise came from, where the numbers were actually put in front of me through the research. And I was like, okay, these are real problems, not only that I was seeing, that I was feeling, but also that exist within the entrepreneurship community in Europe.
Yeah, when facts becomes the actual proof. Well, it was before you told more of a story that you're hearing, but during the research, it became a factual thing that you could see.
Yeah.
So yeah,
for sure.
so that changes the viewpoint completely from just going, people are suffering to, oh, this is how much it's
Yeah,
happening.
these are the numbers. This is, yeah, like that is always that, I would say like consistently would always like take me aback within the research process and the writing process.
Yeah, it definitely. So in the final like sections, you explore this notion of the unicorn effect and the potential for creating a vibrant Afropean startup boom. How can this concept kind of help Africans create their own like startup ecosystem?
Mm-hmm. So, at risk of sounding like a broken record, money creates money, opportunity creates opportunity, success creates success. Within the startup community, what we see is that big successes lead to, other, maybe not so big successes, but successes too. And then you have like a community.
Yeah.
So one of the examples that I use in the book is the PayPal Mafia. And so the PayPal Mafia, that's Peter Thiel, Elon Musk. I'm blanking on the other names, but like you have one company, right, that succeeds, in this case, PayPal. But everyone that has played a role in making this company succeed or invested in the company or, was working for the company in one capacity or another, when they decide to like branch off and do their own thing, they've had this PayPal experience. They've had a front row seat to what success looks like. But not only that, they also have this community of very successful people that can also invest in their ideas on the other hand, right? So it then becomes a cycle of people succeeding. We also see this with the Flipkart Mafia in India, the NetBlog Mafia here in Belgium, where huge successes lead to other huge successes within the community. And how this can help the African community, it's just via, a venture capital can also be understood on making quote unquote intelligent bets. And the more bets we make with African founders, not only on the continent, but in Europe too, the more we increase our chances to strike gold, realize a unicorn, and this unicorn creates like wealth within the community that can then be reinvested. And then we have more founders solving bigger problems in order to be successes themselves and invest in other founders that are also working on interesting problems. So I think that's how we can create opportunities for ourselves, by making bets, and hopefully these bets lead to huge successes that create the snowball effect.
Yeah, and those moments are teachable moments that you won't get unless you are part of that circle as well.
Right.
So it's a skill that they've learned now. Oh, this is what works, this is what doesn't work if you want to run a business. So you cannot learn that unless you are in that environment. So that helps you. So we spoke about this AI boom that's currently happening now. So what role do you see technology playing in terms of empowering the Black community, and especially in Africa and across the diaspora?
Yeah. I think technology for me can be understood as a tool to solve inefficiency. So we talked about the dreads, right? It's very inefficient for me to travel about 3 hours. So I'll give you my story. I live in Brussels. I have to travel 3 hours to Liège to go to a guy who does my hair, for example. That's quite inefficient. So imagine if there were a way to, cut that time, maybe 30 minutes. I can visit someone that I trust. Or maybe this tool that you described earlier, crochet my hair, can cut on this time, and I can save an hour or so out of that 3 hours, because I have the technology. I have access to more people within my community that are solving this problem. I imagine, in the first instance, I don't have to travel 3 hours. Maybe I can go on like an app or whatever, and it can give me who's crocheting at the moment within my area, and I can go to, right? So in terms of empowerment, I think technology solves inefficiencies. When we solve inefficiencies, we save time. When we save time, we have more time, more resources to attribute to other problems. And this is how a community can get better. This is how communities can improve. by solving inefficiencies within their community. And I think this is how technology can empower. This is how AI can empower. A lot of people are afraid of AI. They're afraid of their jobs may become redundant, etc. But whilst that is a fact, especially in the unregulated case, there also lies an opportunity in reskilling, upskilling. How can you do your job even more efficiently using AI, etc.? How can you be more productive? And when you are more productive, what can you do with that other time that you now have? Can you spend more time with your kids, for example? Can you spend more time with your friends? So technology always creates opportunities, and within the Black or African community, I think technology is an opportunity.
Yeah, it is. It opens up doors. It fixes things that we had issues with. So yeah, so there is that fear mongering around AI, being like, jobs won't be replaced. That is true to a degree too. It's going to happen. But at the same time, it opens up opportunities for upscaling and all those other things that are still there. So it's all about grabbing the opportunity that is there rather than being, let's not look at it, to just let it pause and see what happens. So as we reach the end, I just want to touch on a few things. What are some of the main takeaways would you like readers to gain from the book itself?
I think as we're coming up on the 3-year anniversary of publishing the book, the more my thoughts have distilled on what I sought out to do, the more I'm realizing that whilst my book was specifically about venture capital, Afropean entrepreneurship, it was also an exercise in just opening up my mind and opening up the minds of my interviewees that hadn't really thought about this topic at length, right? That hadn't really organized their thoughts in an interview format, etc. And with that being said, I think the main takeaway from my book is about, opening one's mind to the opportunities that are out there, especially the non-obvious ones, and to really investigate okay, I know this, but what are the potential gaps in my knowledge and how can I efficiently explore those? I think, the meta takeaway from my book would definitely be that, the exploration of gaps in knowledge.
Nice takeaway. So as we conclude, what advice or message would you offer to inspiring entrepreneurs who are navigating the challenges of being an entrepreneur?
I would say to those entrepreneurs, shout out to you all. You're doing extremely hard work. Work that I probably could never do, to be very honest. And I would say to those entrepreneurs as well, just being on the investor side and seeing what I've seen, seeing the successes, seeing the failures. One of the most important things is how to save time as a founder. And this can be in things like, okay, how can I efficiently organize my fundraising process? A lot of people would, go on the internet, search up how to do this, but there's also the community aspect where you can reach out to people that have done it to be able to know how to do it. And that is something that is really understudied, underexplored, in my opinion, for whatever reason. But I think really reaching out to your network, exploring who's in your network, how they can help, is a really great way to save time and to also, create relationships that might be beneficial in the future. So I would really encourage entrepreneurs to really dig deep into their network, because it is surprising how many people are willing to help if someone shows some passion.
Yeah. And you get an opportunity to get lived experience. So if you start with something, someone is going through that stage, they'll give you their experience. So it cuts that your research time exponentially.
Yeah. And also just mistake time,
Yeah.
You might make mistakes that that person can forewarn you about, no, don't incorporate your company like this, do it like this, because if you do it like this, you might meet this challenge in the future. Those are things that you can get from your community, people that have done it before. that you don't necessarily have to go through yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's it from us. Once again, I would like to say thank you for being here and giving some of your time and sharing some of your stories. Quite enjoyed this. Thank you so much. And that is it from us, and see you on the next episode.